You know, so many 4X grand strategy games deal with building up your own empire. Do you ever just want to play one about tearing one down? That's what you get with Jon Shafer's At the Gates, a game about the Dark Ages at the fall of the Roman Empire. And the game's development has gone on so long, it almost feels like it dates back to the Roman Empire. The game finally hit its official release on January 23rd, 2019, but the development cycle has been interesting, to say the least. So let's bring you up to speed. What is this game, and why did it take 7 years to make? I'm Dean from Curse, and here's the story behind Jon Shafer's At the Gates. Now your first question might be, who is Jon Shafer, and why did he put his name on the title of the game like it's Sid Meier's Civilization or something? Well, the answer probably lies in the fact that he worked on Civilization. After being an active modder for Civilization 3, Shafer was brought in as a 19-year-old intern at Firaxis Games. That turned into a full-time position, and he ended up working on Civilization 4's Warlords and Beyond the Sword expansions. Firaxis was so impressed with Shafer's work, they made him the director and lead designer of Civilization 5 at the age of 25. After finishing his work on Civ 5, he left Firaxis and started his own company, Conifer Games. Soon after, he launched a successful Kickstarter campaign, raising over $100,000 for his brand new game, At the Gates. That was in early 2013. Since the game didn't come out until 6 years later, you might correctly assume that there were some slight hang-ups in the development process. Despite originally being slated for a 2014 release, the game hit numerous snags and delays, and most of its core team had to work other jobs to support themselves as they worked on it. In 2017, Shafer took up a full-time job at Paradox Interactive, the developer behind the Europus Universalis and Hearts of Iron games, but he left the job later that same year, citing creative differences. Then, on January 9th, just 2 weeks before the game's release, Shafer released a blog post detailing his struggles with ADHD and the drugs he took to manage it, and the variety of struggles he went through just creating the game over the years. But now that it's out, what actually is this game that nearly killed him to make over more than half a decade? You know how in Civilization, there's always a threat from barbarian encampments around you? Well, At the Gates is essentially a game where you play as those Dark Age barbarians, jockeying to fill the power vacuum left behind as the Roman Empire crumbles. Or at least that's the setting. The actual gameplay is very different from most 4X games because it's less about managing cities and resources and more about managing people. In fact, you only get one settlement for the entire game. This is your encampment, if you will. And that settlement can pick up and move at any time since your tribe is nomadic. Within that, you're given clans to work with. Each clan has certain traits and temperaments that will make them more or less suited to certain types of tasks. For example, some units might be violent, which makes them good in combat, but likely to start trouble if you keep them around other clans. Others have an affinity to a particular trade, like blacksmithing or agriculture, or they might be completely averse to a certain type of job. Still, it's up to you to decide what job to train each clan in and then how to manage them. Like any strategy game, discovery and exploitation of the land is a core mechanic of the game. Only now you have to train each individual unit in a particular profession, and you need to make sure they actually want to do the jobs you give them. So in a sense, it's almost like playing Civilization with a dash of The Sims thrown in, where you're constantly juggling not only your own grand ambitions, but the needs and wants of the people you need to accomplish them. The concept of keeping your citizens content is pretty common in 4X games, whether they call it morale, happiness, or amenities, but having to manage the mood of individual units based on their individual traits is fascinatingly unique. In that sense, happiness isn't something that happens on a global or even city-wide scale. You can keep everyone really happy, but still have one malcontent. A clan can be working happily, but then become obsessed with a particular desire. At this point, you need to decide whether to give them their way, which usually means putting them in a new location or spending resources to train them in a new profession, or just ignore them and let them get angry, at which point their productivity will go down significantly. The whole game is full of those sorts of micromanagement decisions, which gives the whole thing a more intimate feel, like each unit is really an individual person. Because the whole game really takes the grand strategy genre to a micro scale, even the time frame is more limited. So much that the turns are measured in half months rather than years. Because of that, seasons and even extreme weather conditions need to be planned for. It's important that you have enough food in reserve to make it through a harsh winter or a drought in summer. Expansion is tricky as well. Since you only have a single settlement, you can only expand your territory in a few select ways, by building resource structures near your borders, building watchtowers outside your borders, or by simply packing up and moving your settlement altogether. All of these features, and a bunch more that would take way too long to get into, combine to bring a genuinely fresh take on the 4X genre, but it's not quite all there yet. For all the ambition and new ideas put forth by At the Gates, it still has its problems. It has a fair share of visual glitches, gameplay bugs, and exploitable mechanics, and AI opponents are largely passive. Despite the game having had an official release, it does still feel like a work in progress. And according to its official Steam page, it is still a work in progress. Shafer and the rest of Conifer Games have laid out a development timeline for them to continue working fixes and new content into the game, going into at least September. These aren't DLC updates, but rather free patches for game balance, bug fixes, diplomacy, UI and UX issues, and upgrades to the game's AI. In other words, they seem to already be aware of the game's biggest weaknesses and are already hard at work fixing them. They even pushed out an earlier than expected quick fix patch on February 8th to manage some of the game's more glaring instability problems. So ultimately, At the Gates is in a weird state. It has lots of good ideas and is generally pretty fun to play. But it's obvious there are some things missing that prevent the game from hitting a higher tier in the 4X genre. Still, with the developer committed to continuing development on it after release, there's a good chance At the Gates will iron out the kinks and end up a much better game in a few months. That's obviously not a guarantee, but it seems to at least be on the right track for now. And even with what's there, At the Gates is at the very least worth a look, especially if you're craving a fresh take on the 4X genre. But it would be perfectly understandable if you also wanted to keep it tucked away on your watch list until you see how the patches and updates play out. That's all a question of whether the base premise interests you enough to see the changes happen from a player's perspective. And even if it doesn't, keep an eye on it anyway. This likely isn't the last time you'll hear the name Jon Shafer.